Welcome back to A Writer's Mind. I'm DelSheree Gladden, and I am jumping back in from where I left off last week, which was kind of a short, awkward chapter I just wasn't really sure what to do with. And I was kind of still trying to figure out where to go starting out this week's writing. So to kind of recap where I finished off last week, I'd sent Beatrix back to Sage's house, intending to have another interaction with her parents so she could get more information about the family and try to draw more information out of them about why things were in such a bad state with the parents. So I'd had the interaction focused on the dad, and he kind of shows this other side that we hadn't really gotten to see him, where he gets physically aggressive with her, and he's the one kind of initiating the negative aspects of their relationship, where in the previous interactions it had mainly been the mom. So I wanted to give readers a chance to get to know the dad more, which helped me get to know him more as well. And it was helpful in giving me a chance to delve into his character more. Because in the beginning, I had pictured the dad, Jeff, as kind of hands-off, letting the mom, who's very controlling and manipulative, letting her kind of rule the house overall, with the dad who kind of keeps his distance but still has this expectation of everything being just the way he wants it to be. But he lets the mom, Melinda, enforce his wants and rules and all of that. And that first part of chapter 10 kind of changed my understanding of who the dad is, that he's actually really the one putting the pressure on in a more obvious and physical way. And so we saw that in chapter 10 with what I wrote on Friday, with him getting more physically aggressive with Sage. He puts hands on her and grabs her hair and shoves her into the wall to try to force her to tell him, where she's been and what's been going on. And Sage, as Beatrix, in her body, kind of fights back, hoping to rile him up enough that he will, instead of her having to confess something, which she doesn't know because she's in Sage's body, but she doesn't have all of her memories, she's hoping that the dad will get mad enough to blurt out what he's hoping she will confess, and then she can learn, what is really going on here. And when she tries to goad him into that by saying, you don't even really care about my soul, you just want me to admit where I was the night that Arya disappeared. And he reacts with confusion, and she realizes that not only does he not know about the mom's suspicions, that he has something else that has really, got his back up about her behavior. And I'd kind of left it there Friday. It only ended up being about 1,000 words. So I wasn't really happy with that length of chapter, because it's just short and it doesn't match the rest of the chapters. But at the time, I wasn't really sure if I wanted to add to it, and didn't really know where to go, if I wanted to create some sort of confrontation between the parents right then, or have that come back later, because I knew whenever the confrontation happened, Beatrix was going to have to deal with it in the moment, and I wasn't sure how she was going to deal with that and how she was going to react to that. So when I sat down to write today, I almost just started in on chapter 11 and kind of moved forward thinking I'd come back to that. But while I was kind of procrastinating basically, and, doing a little bit of cleanup and finding some other stuff to kind of work through some thoughts as I was preparing to sit down to write, it did strike me that it would be weird to leave the confrontation to later, to have this gap if the dad is right then and there upset that his wife has some sort of suspicion that she did not tell him about and that she brought the pastor into it. Either the mom was going to have to be gone somewhere in the middle of the night, or which wouldn't really make sense, or that confrontation needed to happen right then and there for it to logically make sense. So I decided I was going to go ahead and continue chapter 10 and just have him shout for the mom, bring her out of bed. This is sort of late at night, not like super late. I'm trying to remember. I can't remember exactly what time it was, but probably like 9-ish, 10. So not, like 3 in the morning or anything. But this gave a chance to really explain the family and their dynamics through the interaction and the action that each character takes, which was really helpful for me as the writer getting to know these characters, and I think it will be helpful for the reader as well. So he calls the mom down, and she comes in immediately kind of panicked. And I tried to make it apparent to the reader that as soon as the mom comes in and you can see she is very scared, she seems to know what's coming next, even if she doesn't know what this is about. And this is where we get a chance to see by him getting physically aggressive and abusive with the mom, with Melinda. He grabs her, he's yelling at her, he's angry. It becomes much more clear that this is not just a family situation of an unstable, bipolar or whatever mother who goes from highs to lows, and the rest of the family kind of just has to deal with that and manage it. That even though she, in my understanding of this character, she still has some mental health issues. The main force of this family's issues and problems and instability is that this dad is extremely controlling and abusive. And the mom's reaction to that is to manage everything, to minimize the times that the dad is going to blow up and hurt someone. So it gives you a little bit more perspective on who the mom is, why she acts the way she does on some level, why she is so harsh and unforgiving to Sage, and why Sage would be rebelling against all of this. So you have these type of personalities as parents, and then we bring in the layer of a extremely conservative, controlling Christian upbringing, and this is kind of just turning into a boiling point for everybody involved. So that's kind of where we leave it. What we get into here in the rest of this chapter, that they're kind of having it out. First, he goes after the mom, how dare you bring in someone else? Because even though he is very religious, he's also very concerned about how they look within their religious community. So he's angry that she went to the pastor and didn't tell him that she had these suspicions that because Sage was gone and had snuck out the night Arya disappeared, she thinks she's involved somehow, and she went to the pastor for help in trying to get Sage to confess, and she did not tell her husband that Sage was gone that night or that she had the suspicions. So he's upset on both sides of that. He confronts her, he is abusive to her, throws her down, and then he kind of turns his focus onto Sage/Beatrix and kind of goes after her, demanding, he's tired of waiting. She either confesses now or that's it. He's going to go after her. And the problem is that obviously Beatrix has no idea where Arya was. That's what she's there to find out. So even, if she wanted to confess to diffuse the situation, she doesn't know. She's trying to get them to tell her what they know about the situation. So she's kind of left with, she has to make up a lie in that situation. She says she went out and met some friends who gave her some drugs, and, she can't really remember the night. And the dad's kind of just disgusted with her, pissed off at the mom, and basically he's about ready to write her off and just be like, there is no saving you. You're basically just, we've tried, you're going to go to hell, I'm going to write you off. And then the mom is just like, no, I can't have a kid, falls away. She's begging, let me get the pastor to help. We can still save her. But it becomes clear to the reader that she's not trying to save her daughter for her daughter's benefit. She can't deal with the judgment of having a child who's gone astray from their belief system. So again, kind of gives you more perspective on the mom and this family dynamic. But so where we end the chapter gives some information to Arya. Obviously to Beatrix. She obviously comes away from this understanding the family better. She doesn't get the answer she's hoping for, as far as she'd been hoping that the mom or the dad actually knew something about Sage's involvement with Arya's disappearance. So she realizes they don't know. But there's a comment that the mom makes at one point that she says that she tried to confront Sage, and Sage lied and said, she didn't even know Arya, so, why would she have anything to do it? And that kind of gives Beatrix a hint that it means something to both the mom and to Sage that Sage may know Arya better than anyone else realized, and that there's some sort of connection there, and she needs to find out what that connection is. So it's putting some of the focus back on Sage as the potential suspect in the disappearance and or death. Gives us a break from Leon. We'll come back to Leon at a later chapter. But I'm wanting to balance out the focus of the investigation. Make sure that Sage is being fully explored, as well as the alternatives of her parents and Leon and whoever else. So I think that will help kind of balance out that focus. But some of the other things that I think were really helpful about going through and writing this chapter and not waiting to come back to it later, I think I need to change the dad's name. I'd mentioned in an earlier episode that I'd asked my daughter for a name suggestion. And at the time, I was picturing this dad as, like I said, kind of hands-off, uninterested, but still, there to keep control of things. And we'd went with Jeff, because that was the actor's name, the Goldbergs. But who this character is has really changed. Like what his personality is, what kind of person he is. And Jeff is just not fitting anymore. So I'm going to think on what might be a more appropriate name. I don't have one right at the moment, but I think at some point, I just don't think that name fits. It's not very intimidating, for one. It fit my earlier idea of who the dad was. But now it's just, as I'm writing some of these things, Jeff yelled or Jeff grabbed her, slammed her against the wall. I'm just kind of like, that just doesn't seem like a Jeff kind of thing to do. So I think I will eventually change his name once I come up with something better. But I think that's the interesting thing of trying to write without a pre-planned outline or sense of who everybody is. I have things to go back and work on as I discover the story and the characters a little bit more. So that's been interesting because my perceptions of who some of the characters are has changed drastically over just these 10 chapters. So I'm keeping my list of things that I need to go back and fix once I get to that point. But that's okay, because that's kind of what I was expecting to do. But I'm looking ahead to chapter 11, which I'll work on tomorrow. I don't know exactly what my next step is. I do want to go back to Kendall. So I think I may kind of come back in toward the end of the school day and then have her spend some time with Kendall after school, kind of in a more casual setting. I find that the school environment really restrictive to write in, so I don't really want to spend a ton of time in the school environment, but we'll kind of see where I take that. But I do need to bring Kendall back in because he's going to be an important part of developing the understanding of who Sage is and what some of her secrets are. So I do need to make him more of a presence. And I think now is a good time to start shifting that focus and start bringing some of Sage's secrets closer to the surface. Again, it's hard kind of balancing out some of the things that I know that I need to bring out to make this all work. This is where not having an outline makes it hard because I don't have the pre-planned beats of here's where I need to reveal certain things. I'm filling that out as I go, which may cause some pacing issues that I have to go back and fix later, but I'll deal with that at that time. But I think we're getting to the point now. I think chapter 11, that's a good, probably I would say about a third-ish of the way through. So I think this is an appropriate time to start bringing up some of what Beatrix is trying to discover, but can't quite get the information from other people just yet. So I think I'm going to bring Sage's limited interaction through her consciousness that Beatrix can sense that's going to start pointing her in the right direction as she interacts with Kendall. So today I spent a little over an hour and a half writing and wrote 1,802 words. So it turned a really short chapter into kind of a long one because I kept that all together, which is fine. And again, some of that's going to get trimmed as I go back and revise anyway. So that's fine. But that's where I'm at starting off this week. I'm getting a better sense of who the characters are. And I think as I work through these next couple of chapters, hopefully the reader as well is getting a better idea of who everyone is where they stand, why they're doing what they're doing, and who they really are, and what some of everybody's secrets are. Sage certainly isn't the only one with secrets in the story. That's where we're ending up for Tuesday, and I will be back tomorrow with another update. Alrighty, back for Tuesday's update. I started thinking about what I was going to do with chapter 11, but after a conversation with Chris, after he had listened earlier about the struggles I was having with trying to balance the parents' reaction with keeping Beatrix mobile and able to go out and investigate, he made the point that I was already in the back of my head debating with myself on that I was kind of starting to force the plot a bit, trying to keep things the way I wanted them, so it made it easier for Beatrix to get around and do her investigations, and making the parents feel unrealistic, which was exactly what I was afraid I was heading toward. So kind of after talking it out with him, it was like, yeah, I need to go back and fix that. And I'll go back more and take care of some other issues that I've come up with. My list of what needs to get fixed is getting pretty long, but this was one that I decided to go back to chapter 10 and just make some changes to the ending of chapter 10, where instead of the dad kind of just throwing his hands up and being pissed off about the situation, he takes Sage's keys and basically says, like, the only thing you're doing for the next while is going to school. And he basically grounds her from everything other than school. He does kind of give a little bit to the mom of saying, hey, if the pastor's willing to talk to her again, fine. I don't think it's going to do any good. He thinks she's kind of a lost cause at this point. But basically, so she's being put on restriction from that. And so after I went back and fixed that part in chapter 10, I had to think again where I was going to go with 11. Because I wanted to bring Kendall back in because he's important for showing what the reader is eventually going to learn about why Sage feels uncomfortable with him, but why she doesn't stand up to him or say anything or break up with him. Also, I realized a lot of the people that Beatrix was talking to about trying to figure out what's going on with Leon were other girls. And the things that girls talk about and are going to hear in rumors are going to be different than the conversation that teenage boys are going to have. And so I wanted that other perspective, and also to kind of explore what Kendall may be aware of and what he may have heard going around the school in relation to Leon, that maybe some of the young women that Beatrix has been talking to wouldn't be aware of or would not have necessarily been included in those conversations. There was a couple things I wanted to accomplish with this chapter with Kendall. It didn't quite hit all the marks for what I got done today. I got 1,989 words written, which really probably should have been the entire chapter, and I may need to look at what I'm doing because I hit a stopping point there. I think I needed to get up and do some other stuff and get dinner going. But the chapter is not complete yet, or at least this scene is not complete. So when I sit down tomorrow to write, I'm just going to let it kind of finish off with what it is, but I'm expecting it's going to be like way too long of a chapter. And I'm going to have to go back and either trim or split it or something. But for this chapter, what I did accomplish, so Sage is grounded at this point. Her mom drops her off at school, which is just kind of mentioned. I don't go into that part of the scene. I start the chapter with Sage after school getting a ride from Kendall. And he's kind of complaining that she is grounded yet again, and basically not necessarily feeling sorry for her and her situation, but just kind of annoyed that it's inconveniencing him. So we're getting a little bit more of his lackluster personality. And I take the opportunity to, he gets kind of, touchy and handsy to get those responses from Sage's subconscious on her inwardly pulling away and cringing and not wanting his attention. But she's still with him, which is a bit puzzling to Beatrix. She's not really the source, or doesn't understand the source of that quite yet. it's kind of just in the back of her mind, though. And she kind of actually starts to get annoyed with it at one point of just like being distracted by Sage's icky feelings that she's putting out from her consciousness and just being like, could you just quit? Like, you're distracting me. It's your own problem if you're with this guy and you don't actually like him or want him to touch you. And she kind of just gets annoyed with feeling those reactions from Sage, more so than paying attention to them or wanting to investigate them. They're at the bottom of her priority list at this point. So Beatrix knows she's going to get in trouble again with Sage's parents, but she needs to take the opportunity to get out and do a little bit more digging. So she asks Kendall for a ride and then talks him into taking her back to the taco place, even though he would rather go somewhere more private and do other things, which neither Sage nor Beatrix is interested in doing with him. So she talks him into taking her to the taco place because she wants to spy on and or possibly interact with Leon and kind of get Kendall's perspective and see if she can get him talking about something he may be aware of that nobody else has brought up yet. So they kind of have a confrontation at the door between what Beatrix guesses are a couple of college students, and Kendall is not someone who reacts well to other people putting him down or, stepping in his realm as he would see it. And so one of the guys kind of gives Sage like a once over and is kind of smiling at her, being a little bit flirty. And Kendall reacts in a typical kind of insecure teenage boy way and tries to start a confrontation with the two of them. And Beatrix is just like, oh gosh, like I don't have time for his stupidity. So she just walks on by, goes up and makes her order and leaves him to be an idiot at the door. And it gets settled peacefully. And the other guys are kind of just some dumb kid and make fun of him a little bit and then take off. So we get a little bit more of Kendall's personality. And that kind of continues as he comes in annoyed at her for having left him. Well, he thinks he's like standing up for her, protecting her or whatever. So it kind of gets him into an agitated state where he's spouting off a little bit, and she uses that to provoke him a little bit, hoping to get him to continue to act stupid and say things, which kind of draws Leon into the conversation because he's up taking the orders this time and kind of sees Kendall being stupid and is poking at him as well because that's the kind of guy he is, and kind of makes this interaction take place where he aggravates Kendall a little bit more, tries to be a little bit flirty with Sage, and starts that interaction that then Beatrix can build off of when they get their food and go sit down. So I wanted the beginning of this to give a little bit more sense of personality to both Kendall and Leon to kind of see where Leon focuses when he's targeting someone, how he can have that charmingness that draws people in before he turns and becomes controlling and aggressive and those sorts of things. So we get a little bit more of their personality, and then they go sit down to get their food, and Kendall kind of starts in on, oh, why are you talking to this guy? Don't you know who he is? And she plays dumb. She's kind of just like, what? I don't know, just some guy taking the order, knowing that this will prompt him to talk and start saying the things he knows about him because he wants to prove to her he's better. You can trust me. I'm going to drive you home. Don't talk to that a-hole. So I got to the point where they're starting to get into the conversation of what he knows about Leon. And so she keeps playing on his insecurities, the fact that Leon was kind of looking at her and flirting with her a little bit to set off the next part of the conversation, which I didn't get to at this point, but it's bouncing around in my head. There were a couple of other things that as I was working through this, and especially after talking to Chris and kind of working through some of the things that I was having a hard time with, I think I'm going to finish out this section. And what I may do next week is kind of spend some time. I originally wasn't going to take the time to do revisions, but I have such a long list of things that I need to work on and clarify that are going to help me finish writing this first draft, that I think I'm about to the point where I need to take a writing break and I need to go back and do revisions on some of these earlier chapters. Now that I have a better sense of who some of the characters are and where the story's going, because I think Sage's parents, I had initially had different concepts of them, and I'm looking back at some of the early chapters and I don't think that their interactions and how I portrayed them are accurate to the way that I want to go now with them. So those need adjusting, and I think that will help me move forward better on who they are and how they're going to be treating and reacting. I think I need to be a little bit more specific. I need to make some adjustments to Leon and the stories about him, because as I'm thinking through what I'll work on tomorrow with the rest of what Kendall's going to talk about and the rumors and things he's heard and observed are not quite fitting with how I started off portraying Leon. So I need to fix some of those things to make him more realistic and to make the situation make more sense so I can move forward with it. Yeah, I think I'm going to finish out this section that I've already kind of got in my head this week. And then next week when I have time, work on fixing some of these earlier chapters and seeing where I need to clarify and figure things out a bit. And then I think that will help me move forward with the rest of what I have going on and work on some of the pacing as well. Because that's something I think I'm still, obviously, with this almost 2,000 words today and the chapter's still not done. Working on that pacing and spacing things out a little bit more where need be, and then some of the rambly parts going back in. So I think I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time revising these chapters for necessarily down to the word level and getting them more polished, but just fixing story problems that have come up as I've shifted a bit with the characters and the overall plan for things. So I think taking some time to pause on just the pure writing and fixing a few other things will be helpful in helping me move forward more productively with the rest of this draft. That's my plan. Tomorrow I will finish off this chapter with Kendall and then kind of just get through the current thoughts in my head on where this is going, then work on some revisions next week. I will be back tomorrow. All right, back for Wednesday. And as suspected, chapter 10 ended up being fairly long. Chapter 11. In total, chapter 11 is about 3,130 words long, which in some of my earlier books, I typically have had 3,000 to 5,000 word chapters, but that's feeling long for this one. I want to keep the chapters a little bit closer to 2,000, maybe 2,500 words, just to keep the pacing going and to make sure I'm not being overly wordy and not checking myself on that. Like I said, I will look at either breaking this chapter up or going back through it and just editing for conciseness and clarity. But as it was, I added another 1,141 words today to wrap up chapter 11. And I finished out the conversation with Kendall. And to be honest, I still debated on whether this was where this chapter should finish, because I didn't quite accomplish all of my goals, chapter 11. I started off with what I talked about yesterday of kind of getting more into Sage's reactions to being around Kendall and his attention and physical aspect of their relationship. And I had that in the first half, but then they're kind of just sitting at a table talking. So that faded away. I'll go back through it. I wasn't sure I quite made some of the points and hints that I needed to enough. But we'll see. There'll be other opportunities for that. It's something I'll make note of to kind of look at this chapter again later. But the other main goal for this chapter was to get a male perspective on Leon and see what he had heard that nobody else that she's talked to has heard yet. And so I think this helps because previously everybody who she'd talked to, she's getting the perspective of the other young women at the school or reading the police reports, the perspective of the adults, parents, or friends involved who are reporting him. But, nothing ever came of that because the girls that he targets are usually not ones who will speak up. So I wanted this different perspective of what are the other guys who know Leon saying about him. And Kendall, I hadn't really thought a whole lot about who is Kendall outside of being Sage's boyfriend. Like, what are his hobbies and activities? How would he have interacted with or known of Leon, who is, I mentioned earlier, was kind of into sports. He's a physical, athletic person. Because that's an easy way for a wide range of people to kind of come together and know each other. But that wasn't feeling right with me for Kendall and how he's behaved so far, and his kind of annoying interaction with the guys at the door and then with Leon, and his insecurities. Not that, attractive or athletic people or anything like that don't have insecurities. We all do, and that's absolutely not like a stereotype I want to lean on for this. But he just wasn't striking me as the like team kind of guy. And as I'm picturing him as far as like physical stature, that wasn't really making a lot of sense to me either. So I decided I wasn't going to go the sports route as far as how he would have some sort of connection with Leon. And I didn't give him a direct connection either. What I ended up doing was that not only has he heard rumors around the school amongst the other male students, but he has a gaming friend in another part of the Denver metro area that he's played with for a while. They regularly play video games together. And this guy at some point had mentioned that his sister had dated Leon, and he mentioned it to Kendall because he's like, hey, this guy goes to your school, like, what the heck? And that he had gotten kind of physical with his sister, and the dad had tried to report it, but the daughter wouldn't really speak up or say anything. And so the dad kind of took it on himself to deal with things and beat the crap out of Leon at one point, which of course Leon's not going to report because, it's stemming from all of his bad behavior. So he's heard the rumors, which he passes on to Sage/Beatrix, about him generally just kind of not being a great guy, that he is rough with girls, pressuring, controlling, that sort of thing. And then he tells her this story about his gaming friend and the sister. And so at this point, he's pretty worked up. He's still irritated that Leon was trying to flirt with Sage. So he's really trying to make the point of, this is a bad dude, stay away from him, and kind of with the added message of like, don't flirt with other guys. Like, you're with me, you're mine. His own controlling, somewhat abusive behavior toward her. So he's kind of getting ramped up, and then he dives into and talks about, what about how he acted? Like, he's a scummy guy, and he doesn't even seem to care about his sister, and kind of says that he just overheard this conversation about him saying negative things about Arya after a vigil. He's standing around talking to some friends, and that kind of leads him into one last rumor that he's heard that relates back to Leon saying that his sister is kind of slutty, and she's always running off, and who knows who she's with, and he's not taking it seriously. He thinks like the parents that she's kind of run off with some guy or something. But Kendall brings up another rumor that had been going around that Beatrix has not come across yet, that Arya had some sort of altercation, just verbal, with a teacher in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Not anything like, oh, she had it out with a teacher and then, that night she disappeared. So it's kind of a weak rumor, and Beatrix, who's already read the police reports, has not come across this, so she's kind of hesitant to take it seriously, about this teacher having anything to do with anything. So she's not really buying into it, but she is seeing how far Kendall is willing to go to distract her or discourage her from having any sort of interactions with Leon, which, as she likely will have another interaction with Leon in the future because she's trying to find out if he kidnapped or killed his sister, that's going to kind of set the stage for Kendall to have another meltdown and provoke or be involved in some other confrontation with Leon. So I don't think I'm necessarily, like, she'll look into this rumor about the teacher, but it's not really going to pan out because I don't want to go that route. But it's more about Kendall and his need to keep her attention focused on him and badmouth anyone else around him. So she's kind of debating, like, how much of what he says can she believe and how much is him kind of blustering. So, like I said, like, she'll look into it, but I think she's going to find fairly quickly it's not really a viable track to take, which will keep her focused on discovering Sage's secrets as well as looking into Leon more. Which kind of brings me back to part of my conversation with Chris of building the instigator's world a little bit more. And he'd asked a question that I hadn't fully thought about on why Beatrix does not have access to Sage's memories and why she can't talk to her. And I'd partially thought about it in just the opportunity for manipulation there is pretty high, that, Sage could try to sway her and those memories could be shaded a bit by her manipulation or what she was trying to get across. But as I was thinking about that more after talking to Chris, it's like, I don't think that's a strong enough reason. And like, yeah, there's a risk of false memory, but that would certainly speed things along if she could look inside Sage's head. But it also adds the problem of, well, if she could just look at Sage's memories and be like, oh, well, this is what happened that night. It's not a very interesting investigation for the reader. So I'm still trying to sort that out in my head. And Chris and I talked about it a little bit. What are some of the barriers that might be involved with why they can't access the memories or talk directly? Maybe it's too invasive or can do damage to the soul or the investigator, something like that. So I'm playing around with those ideas, and I'm going to take some time to kind of think through what exactly are the rules of the investigator's world and try to pin that down a little bit more. So that might be something else I focus on next week, rather than straight writing, doing more world building, and not necessarily as in-depth as like making a world Bible or something for this world, but getting my ideas straightened out and setting up some rules so I can be more consistent and things will make more sense, and you're not having the reader sitting there questioning, well, why can't she just look at her memories? Because that's a valid question. So I'll be thinking about that and seeing where I want to go with that and how I'm going to develop the world a little bit better so I can keep things on track and consistent. But that's kind of where I paused for now, that we get to know Kendall a little bit more, see his personality, and set up some future confrontations involving him that will hopefully shed some light on some stuff. So yeah, I will be back Thursday working on chapter 12 and not totally sure what that's going to be yet. So we'll see. I am back to talk about chapter 12. So I hadn't really been sure what direction I was going to take with this when I finished off yesterday. I knew I needed to show Beatrix being a little bit more resourceful and finding a way to get around the restrictions of her parents. And I was debating how to do that and how to make that interesting but still useful in some way. And as I mentioned in the last section, I also knew, she had blown off her mom and gone with Kendall after school. So there was, of course, going to be consequences to that with her parents. She's supposed to be grounded. She wasn't where she was supposed to be. But I didn't want to spend another chapter showing her fighting with her parents. We just had the interaction with the dad and then kind of the mom coming in at the end recently. And I didn't feel like there was going to be any further useful information to pass on the reader through another fight with the parents. So I decided to start off chapter 12 just kind of recapping that, yes, of course, she showed up later that afternoon, evening. Her mom's pissed off. They have a to-do there in the foyer as soon as she walks in. But the mom is more just angry and venting and yelling at her. She's kind of in a position where there's not really like a ton more she can do as far as take things away. She's taken away the car. She's taken away her electronics. She's grounded, but outside of physical force, which they're not afraid to use, but I didn't really want to get into that again right here. So they just yell at each other. I recap that without getting into it. And she tells her that she has an appointment with the pastor after school the next day. She will pick her up. She'll wait for her, and then she'll drive her home immediately after the appointment. So she's kind of making it very clear. There's no confusion here. There's no, oh, you didn't specifically say you were going to pick me up, so I got to ride with Kendall. So she's made it very clear what the expectations are for the next day, and she sends Sage/Beatrix up to her room to spend the rest of the evening there. So I recap that quickly just to, yes, there were consequences. Yes, the parents are mad. We've got the appointment for tomorrow, but now let's get into the bulk of the chapter to accomplish something and get more information to the reader that's going to be helpful. So when I started this, I wasn't really sure what direction I wanted to take, whether Sage already had something in place to contact other people or to do whatever she needed to do while grounded, or if she was going to have to come up with a new idea or what. So I really struggled to get this chapter started because of that. I didn't know where I was going with it. And I ended up taking forever to get through not a ton of words. By the time I wrapped up and was ready to quit for the evening, I didn't finish the chapter, but I got 1,262 words, but they were slow to get down on the page, especially like the first 3 or 4 paragraphs. I kind of kept going back over them and thinking, and what do I want to do? I think it got a little rambly in those paragraphs, doing some reflection on Beatrix's part, bringing up some of the frustrations of these investigations that she goes through. So, yeah, I don't know. I'll probably rework the beginning of this chapter when I go back and work on revisions. But kind of just meandering my way through the beginning chapters gave me some time to think and figure out what I wanted to do. So I started off with her kind of searching Sage's bedroom because her first thought is, well, she's probably got a secret phone somewhere. Like she's bought a little burner phone, and she uses that to contact her friends when she's grounded and her parents take her usual phone. Like, that was the most logical thing that Sage would do, but at the same time, it didn't quite feel right for her character. And it made me kind of think, what day-to-day restrictions do her parents place on her? Are they very controlling with money? Do they give her an allowance? Because I really haven't brought up anything about Sage having like an after-school job. So I'm going to have to think on that, if that's something she might have. Kind of on the fence. I think I need to think about it more. It would, maybe cause some issues with the story, which I'd have to think through before I made that change. But I almost feel like it may make sense for her parents to be insistent on her having some sort of job, teaching her that, responsibility and work ethic, that might go along with her, with their religious beliefs. But with my own kids having recently graduated from school, I think it is a little bit harder now for kids to have after-school jobs and keep up with all the time and effort and requirement that goes into school right now, especially if they're involved in any extracurriculars. So I'm thinking on that, of where her parents would put their focus. Would it be more important that she works and have that after-school job to learn that responsibility? Or is their focus more on schooling and not interrupting any time that could be devoted to studying and doing homework? I'd started out the first scene with the parents with them being very, very concerned about grades and academic success. So I may stick with that and leave off her having a job, which then might mean that they need to give an allowance of some sort, because I have had Beatrix spending money here and there, going to get tacos, and she has her car, so she's got to pay for gas and get that filled up and all of that. But with all of Sage's behavioral problems, she may not always get that allowance and has to be a little bit more careful with her money. So I need to, think about that, work that out a little bit more before I start revisions. But the other thing, as I was working through this initial difficult part of the chapter that I just couldn't get going on, I decided to not go with her already having a secret phone in place, but with Beatrix considering it would be really helpful to me and her investigative efforts to have something like that. So I'm going to have her just purchase something cheap that she can keep on hand and hide so that she's able to access the internet, do what she needs to do without being restricted or observed by the parents. So that I'll come back to later in the next chapter. I think I'm going to enlist maybe Sarah's help with that. So what I ended up doing was that this was kind of a surprise to me as I was writing, was to bring in the little brother, Lyndon. So she's kind of searching the room, tearing it apart a little bit, looking for some way to access the internet without having to go and ask the mom for the computer back. And then, because she's assuming she's going to make me, sit at the kitchen table while she observes everything I'm doing, which I think this character would do that. So she's kind of tearing apart the room, searching, and she hears a little knock on her door and opens it to find Lyndon there. And he's got his phone with him, and he kind of holds it out to her, and he's like, "You're grounded again, right?" She's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Do you want to use my phone again as usual?" Which kind of sets up that this had been her backup plan, was that she would use her little brother's phone. So Beatrix starts looking through his phone once he hands it over to her. And before she gets on to looking up the files about the teacher that came up in the last chapter, Mr. Hastings, seeing if there's any legitimacy to a possibility of him being involved. Before she does that, she kind of thinks about it and she's like, well, most people don't memorize phone numbers in this time period. So she opens up Lyndon's contacts and looks to see if Sage had previously saved some of her friends' contacts in there and who she would have been interested in talking to. And so she finds kind of the expected ones, Kendall, Riss, the other two girls that she talks to at school. She has those saved in there. And since, Kendall is young, he doesn't have, probably like most adults have business and personal and, hundreds of contacts in their phone. He's only got a handful, so it's not hard to look through. So she finds her handful of friends saved into his phone. And then she finds a contact that's just labeled friend. And that piques her interest. So she clicks on it and sees there's no other information in the contact other than the name friend and then a phone number that she doesn't recognize. So she looks and sees what exchanges have there been between this phone and friend, and finds some text messages. But they're all kind of vague. They seem to be communicating in a way that suggests they expect someone else at some point might look at these texts, whether because they're using someone else's phone or because Sage's parents are going to periodically check their kids' electronic devices and stuff. So the messages aren't like super helpful, but she notices that the most recent exchange occurred on the night that Arya died, or that she disappeared, and that this friend person is asking Sage to meet him or her to sneak out, and the contact says, "I need you. Can you sneak out? Come meet me at the same place as last time." So this kind of gave me a chance to bring in Lyndon for a few minutes and show kind of that relationship, but also the consequences of the siblings, of whatever the fallout is going to be. So it kind of gave Beatrix a moment to, she's not human, but to be a little bit more human and have some compassion for the fact that, this little guy is going to be affected by the ultimate decision of her investigation into Sage. So we give her, just a little bit more vulnerability, a little bit more compassion that the reader can connect with there, which I thought ended up being a helpful moment, and to give a little bit more idea of who she is as a person. And then it took me so long to get through this chapter that I stopped right about there. And I'll wrap it up tomorrow. But yeah, kind of seeing the text messages. She takes some screenshots of them so she can dig into them later when she's back at school and has access to her laptop and the internet. And she's going to dig into that a little bit more next time. So that's kind of where I stopped as far as writing. I did kind of catch myself in things that I'll go back and look at later. I caught myself kind of trying to explain the earlier interaction with Kendall, especially in relation to her looking up the information on Hastings and not seeing it, because it is definitely a red herring. Like I said before, I don't want to add a third major area of investigation, but it's going to point her towards some other information. I'm really trying to catch myself when I do things like that, where I'm explaining things to the reader because I'm uncertain of whether they're catching everything I want them to catch as I write. And I think once I get to the stage of having some beta readers look at it, I'll be able to clean some of that up a little bit more. But definitely as I go back and do revisions, I'm going to look for those spots where I'm explaining things and then make sure that I'm going back and writing in enough information that I think the reader will understand what I'm saying without me having to directly tell them how I want this to come off or what I want them to figure out. So that was just something I noticed and that I need to keep an eye on, especially moving forward. And as I go back and do revisions, I need to work on that as well. So I paused there. I guess I got a decent amount of words in, but it didn't feel like a super productive writing session because I struggled with this chapter and figuring out which direction to go with it so much. But got in the words, so it at least made some progress, and now I have a good idea of where I'm going to go tomorrow with wrapping up this chapter and then bringing Sarah back into things next time. I will be back tomorrow to wrap up the week of writing. All right. Well, I was able to get to my writing early this morning and get to a good kind of wrapping up point for the moment because I have a bunch of stuff I need to get done today to get ready for a trip. So I couldn't, like last night, spend forever on writing half of a chapter. I needed to focus and get it done and get to a good stopping point. So I didn't get quite as many words, but I did accomplish what I wanted to accomplish with this writing session. So I spent about an hour this morning. I got 1,644 words, which I guess is a decent amount. I was able to finish off chapter 12 and get started on chapter 13. So I have a place to go next and just to kind of get down on paper my initial thoughts and where I want to go with this chapter so I can be ready to kind of jump back in next time. Yeah, kind of depending on how things go. I may just pause there and work on some revisions. But I have found the few times as I've been working on this goal of writing, not every day, but 5 days a week to get into a better writing practice, I have found that if I stop at a non-stopping point, if I'm not, writing to the end of a chapter, if I'm writing to a point where I've accomplished one part of what I want to accomplish, but then I'm still in the middle of things and can jump right back in, I do have a much easier time getting started in the next writing session. Writing yesterday, I was starting a new chapter and I didn't know where I was going with that chapter. So like I said, it really took me a long time to get going on that one and to figure out what I wanted to do. Whereas today, it was a lot easier to jump back in because I knew the next steps for wrapping up that chapter. And then I had an idea of where chapter 13 should start as well. So I may continue trying to do that to not necessarily wrap up the chapters. Sometimes that's just going to happen because that's where, the idea is going to run out or my time is going to run out. But yeah, overall, it's actually been a helpful tactic for me to keep me more productive in my writing is to not stop at the end of a chapter or a really concrete stopping point. But anyway, so where I started today was she had found the text messages between Sage and the contact named Friend. And the next thing she needed to do while using Lyndon's phone was get into the school's system. And she wanted to look up information about Hastings, as well as kind of dig around into Aria's academic files. So this is something I'm not going to get really detailed on, cybersecurity and how hacking occurs and all of that. I'm not super knowledgeable on that. I don't want to spend days on end researching this type of thing. I may try to dig into it a little bit more later, but for right now, I'm just kind of glossing over that aspect of it. I just have Beatrix mention this is a specialty of hers. She finds it very interesting and engaging, kind of game-like. So she spends her downtime learning about breaking into databases and these types of systems. So it's something she enjoys doing as a hobby. So she's very good at getting into systems and finding the information that she wants. Yeah, we'll see if I get any more detailed than that. I don't want that to be the focus of this story and bog it down or bore readers with firewalls and file systems and what type of security and all of that. So for now, I just kind of left it as she's really good at this. She knows how to get into things, and she gets to the files that she needs. So first thing is, she looks into Hastings. She doesn't think that this is a viable lead to start with, but she is curious about his background and just seeing if this was a real event or a pattern of behavior with Arya or with him. So she looks into Hastings' personnel file. He's kind of boring, kind of bland, no super interesting things that put up any red flags. But she is able to see that overall he seems to be a fairly solid teacher, which leads her to, okay, so what was this incident? She looks for a write-up, reads the summary of it, and, it's really, it's enough that she was being disrupted, and he kind of sends her out of class to go be dealt with by administration because she's arguing and throwing a fit over him not accepting a late project that isn't even finished. So she reads that and then is kind of okay, was this an isolated incident or a pattern? And she starts looking through her behavior file and sees that Arya's behavior issues have been escalating over the past few years, but particularly the months leading up to her disappearance. And she's balancing her experience and how she's interpreting that with what the police think. The police think, she's just kind of this escalating young woman whose behavior is getting out of control, which led to her, fighting with her parents and then running off. So she can understand why they're looking at this as this girl ran off. She will probably turn back up in, a few days or weeks or whatever. And especially since the parents kind of labeled her as this chronic runaway and this problem child. So she kind of gets why the police maybe aren't taking it as seriously as they could, but she's also looking at this from her past experience over hundreds of years of seeing these patterns with people, and she's seeing it more as her escalating behavior is a cry for help. Something is going on in her personal life, whether just the stuff with her parents or something in addition to that she's increasingly not able to manage or control or figure out or deal with in some way. So she's acting out more and more. And to her interpretation, she's asking for help with these blow-ups and the way she's acting, but she's not getting any help from anyone. Her parents are passing it off as her just being emotional, out of control teenager that they're just tired of dealing with. And the school is just kind of doing the same of just this is just, teenage behavior, just hand out the punishments, tell her to do better, that sort of thing, not very effectively dealing with the situation. So she's getting a sense that it's not just issues with her parents, there's more going on here. And she doesn't know what that is yet, but it's giving her a direction to start looking, to start trying to find more information on a personal level and see where that additional conflict may have come from. And then she's also got the text messages. She's kind of dug back through them early in this chapter, and she's got a couple of different locations that she wants to check out, things that have come up in the texts between Sage and Friend. So I wrap up chapter 12 with her finding all the files that she needs, kind of coming to the conclusion that she doesn't think Hastings involved in anything, but she needs to look and find what the additional conflict was that Arya was dealing with that's really setting things in motion over the past couple months. So then I did jump into chapter 13 and get started on that, just so like I said, I kind of have an idea of where I want to go with this, and then I can jump back in. So I only got a little less than a page on chapter 13, but I did bring Sarah back in, and I felt like at this point, because Sage's car has been taken away, so Beatrix needs alternate transportation, she also thinks Sarah's pretty good at observing the details and drawing some conclusions, so she wants her along on this trip to kind of see, do these places have any significance? Can they, figure out anything based on that? Try to determine who Friend is and why the two of them are needing to meet up secretly and to hide the identity of who this person is. So I feel like at this point, Sarah is going to need a little bit more convincing of why Sage wants to be involved in all of this. I do lean a little bit into like her interest in mysteries in general, that this is just something that's like really caught her interest. But then she also kind of plays on Sarah's frustration that nobody's taking it as seriously as they should. So she kind of gives some of the reasoning of, I'd ask Riss to help me with this, but like this whole topic just kind of weirds her out and she doesn't want to talk about it. And anybody else I mention it to, like they're just kind of flippant about the whole thing. Like, oh yeah, let's gossip about the fact that Arya's missing and where she went or who did what. And this really strikes a chord with Sarah because it's how she's been feeling as well. That, she's the only one at school who's really trying to do anything at this point. So it is a bit manipulative on Beatrix's part because she is playing on the emotional aspects of Sarah and why she's feeling so connected to this case. But it works. It's effective. Beatrix is good at this. She's had lots of practice. So she does get Sarah on the same page as her and get her to believe that Sage has a genuine interest in helping her and that they can team up and maybe they can even figure this thing out. So she gives her kind of that hope that I've got some ideas and we should check them out together because nobody else is doing anything. So that's going to kind of lead to them, I think, the rest of the chapter, checking out the locations and trying to piece together some things. So at this point, kind of what I'm wondering in the background, and I think maybe I may, once I get some revisions done on these early chapters, I may just need to enlist a few beta readers to take a look at where I'm at right now and have them tell me, like, what do you think is going on? Because I'm having a hard time judging, am I giving too much information? Will the reader have already pieced together some things that I'd rather it took a little bit longer for them to figure out? Mainly, can the reader guess who Friend is? Do they have an idea, like a clear idea, not just like, I think so, of whether Sage is involved, whether Leon's involved? I'd like to know where the reader's thoughts and guesses are at this point in the book to know where I need to go from here or what I need to change, alter, add to, or subtract, even if I'm giving too much away too early. Yeah, because I'm having a little bit of a hard time gauging that myself. Yeah, I may ask a few people if they might be willing to read and kind of just give me their thoughts up to that point and make some guesses about where they think the story is going. I think that might be helpful to me at this point. So yeah, we'll kind of see where that goes, see if I can recruit some help on that front to help me figure out what changes I need to make and where I want to go from here. So that kind of wraps up my planned writing time for this week. I may finish off chapter 13 before I dive into revisions, or I may leave it where it's at and then work on some revisions over the next week and see how that goes. So we'll see, making progress, but I think I'm at a point where I do need to stop, fix a few things, get some outside thoughts and opinions on how things are going and where we're at in the mystery, and then kind of make some additional adjustments after that. Thinking about that, I'll be playing with some other ideas in my mind as I go through that and thinking about it over the weekend. But I will be back with more thoughts on where this thing's going and what I went back and fixed to try to get it more cohesive and in the right direction for next week. Thanks for listening. If you have any thoughts or ideas you want to throw at me, please feel free to do that. If you want to check out my other projects that are completed and available, you can find me and more information about me and my books online at DelShereeGladden.com. The theme music is again by Mon Plaisir, and I will be back next week.